I'm going to be describing some controversial topics over the next 2 days. Some of these may startle or disturb some of you, but the unfortunate reality, the harsh reality we are all facing is we continue to age despite the many interventions that we are engaged in. And I'm turning age 67 this year. And if we fail, and when I use the word we, everyone in this room, and all the 400,000 to 500,000 supporters of my life extension group, if we collectively fail to integrate what's occurring in the laboratory model right now, I'm talking about radical lifespan extension, which I'm going to show you many slides about. I'm talking about indices of age reversal. This is occurring in the laboratory setting. But if we fail to rapidly transition that technology into human clinical trials, and then into clinical medical practice. If we fail, I'm scheduled to die in 18 years. At age 67, if you do most of what you're supposed to do right, you're lucky to make it to 85, or you may not. It's kind of scary. And that's why I'm talking to groups wherever I can to accelerate the pace of translational medicine from the laboratory bench into people's bodies. I'm tired of the animals getting all the benefits. And what's fantastic is the science is there. It's not the science that's impeding us. It's a regulatory structure that causes clinical trials to be so burdensome to initiate and follow through. These are IND-approved trials through the FDA that we're not doing the research we should be doing. Now, for those who don't know me, I set up a group called Life Extension 44 years ago in 1977 in a little industrial bay in Pompano Beach, Florida. For 3 years, I went on all the local radio talk shows. I got the newspapers coming in doing articles, but there was zero interest, not one nickel of revenue. And then in 1980, we started a newsletter called Anti-Aging News. And then some people at least would write $27 a year checks to subscribe to our newsletter. And we are currently the world's largest consumer-based anti-aging medical group. We send out our Life Extension magazine every single month. We have published consistently since 1980, where we look at the peer-reviewed published literature and then convert that information into lay language so that all of our readers can potentially benefit from the information that we publish. And we've been doing this for a long time. We've got a track record I'll show you at the end of my presentation, but we typically identify better ways to prevent and treat disease that are published, but they're not paid attention to by the conventional mainstream and sometimes alternative doctors. They have good intentions, they miss out on it. So our history, 1980, Anti-Aging News. 1986, we switched to Life Extension Report, and then the volume of new information became so overwhelming, we switched to Life Extension Magazine. And last month, we mailed out over 400,000 individual copies of Life Extension Magazine. That is a world record for us, by the way, in our 44 years of existence. Never sent out that many magazines. And we also send out tens of thousands to doctors' offices who they give to their patients to keep them informed as to what they can do to preserve their precious health. Now, one of my controversial contentions is that it may be possible, using existing interventions today, to reverse, at least partially, aging in people. We might be able to do it today, and the fantastic news is it's no longer Bill Falloon and Life Extension doing it by myself. Groups like WebMD, now this is a rather conventional website. They're rather hostile towards alternative medicine. And just a couple months ago, they published an article talking about, is there a cure for aging? And they also discussed about immortality. This didn't used to occur in the past. We would be persecuted, ridiculed, prosecuted. And nowadays, you've got credentialed publications talking about engineering, re-engineering our molecular biology so that we never die. And they talked about groups like us. We're not just looking to slow down aging a little bit and live a little longer. We're trying to prevent death itself. And they used some examples in the WebMD article about certain species that seem to live forever. The immortal jellyfish and lobsters. They secrete a large quantity of a youthful enzyme that may keep them alive forever if they're not eaten first. So at least there's examples in the animal world of which death is not one of those problems like it is right now. And this was on the WebMD website. This chart, now it wasn't our website. This is this conventional group talking about by around the year 2065, we may be living to 900 to 1,000 years. It's made it into the mainstream in a huge, huge way. And a lot of that is being assisted by people like Dr. Barzilai. He is pioneering the metformin trial, where he's going to take a large group of people and see if metformin by itself can slow and or reverse certain aging processes. Our hats off to him, but we've been recommending metformin since 1995. We already know what its benefits are and limitations. So if these people enter his trial, all they're going to get is metformin, I'm afraid they're going to get a limited benefit. They ought to be involved in more of what I'm going to talk about over the next 2 days, and that is a comprehensive strategy to slow and reverse our aging processes. Now, Fortune magazine every year has an annual investor's guide. This is read by the titans of industry, biopharm, the investment community, and they talked about the need to understand and address the biology of aging. And they use some examples, which you've heard about here before with Greg Fahey's work with Intervene Immune, which I've helped to fund and get him up off the ground with that. But he was able to reverse aging 2.5 biological years, as we know, and other people with therapeutic plasma exchange. It's catching the attention of mainstream people so that they're publishing articles that talk about people living a long time. And the absolute need, this is now a requirement, to reverse at least certain aspects of biological aging to protect the United States from a health care cost tsunami. If we don't reverse aging, Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance, it just can't afford to take care of lots of old, sick people. And as a side benefit, they mentioned reversing aging, more productive years, longer life, all kind of nice things. So they concluded their editorial with a question and a suggestion. Why don't we launch an Operation Warp Speed for biological aging the way they've done against COVID? Well, we've been trying to do that at Life Extension now for 44 years, and it is now coming about. I'm going to play just a brief clip from a Phil Donahue Show appearance I made in March of 1995, and you'll see what I've been doing to try to make what's happening today happen much sooner.
Is it possible if you take enough vitamins, and there are pills out there that can keep you young forever? What essentially is the point that you're making here? That there are on the shelf around the world, absent a meddling FDA, I'm sure you would allege, many companies in other countries that are sharing with their customers material which enhances life, which makes you feel younger and makes you live longer. Do I understand your position?
Medicines available in other countries are 5 to 30 years ahead of United States medicine, depending on which classification of drug you look at.
Right.
And as a result, Americans are the last to get the benefits of these breakthrough medications. They pay the highest prices in the world for their prescription drugs.
So we move forward from 1995, where the idea of slowing or reversing aging was so unique. I got on the Phil Donahue Show. Got a lot of free publicity because very few people understood what we were really trying to seek. January 2020, study coming out of the prestigious Buck Institute in the C. elegans model of aging, and it's got a lot of publicity around the world. They were able to mutate just 2 cellular pathways and extend the lifespan in the C. elegans model 400 to 500%. And this is the equivalent of humans living to be over 400 years of age. It happened, and the media talked about these 2 pathways, which most of you are already addressing. It's not going to enable us to live to be 400, but we're taking metformin, we're doing intermittent fasting in order to improve insulin signaling. We're taking certain mTOR inactivators. We want to suppress excess mTOR in our body. So what we are already doing, and they made it clear, the pathways they used to extend the C. elegans model of aging to the human equivalent over 400 years, they exist in our bodies. We just have to figure out a way to modulate those pathways and more so we can theoretically live to that incredible period of time. And this is just one example of a scientific study that is over a year old, and I don't know if anyone's trying to translate that into people yet. It's an absolute tragedy if they're not doing that. And the opportunity that we have right now to intervene into aging. We've never had so many different options. Now, I suspect most of you are engaged in some or all of these interventions. How many here are taking metformin, by the way, the drug metformin? Do I only see two hands? Two hands? Well, okay. I'll convince you tomorrow to take metformin. I don't sell it, by the way. It's a prescription drug, but I think it's a great way to slow aging, reduce degenerative disease risk. And what's happening is, and in fact, only 2 of you raised the hands is indicative of this, we've got a lot of people who are deferring experimental interventions. I'm not one of them. I'm doing everything right now. Self-experimentation, working with doctors, wherever we can. If I recommend something, typically I've done it already, and so has my research group. But there's people who are waiting until they become very frail, develop multiple comorbidities, and they come to us and they say, well, now it's time for age reversal. And I have to flat out say, for the most part, I'm afraid you've got too many illnesses, you're too frail, you're hanging by a thread, and if we do something aggressive, we may push you right off the cliff. So delaying age reversal interventions can be something where you reach a point of no return, at least with today's technology. So move forward to January 2021. Wall Street Journal reports on a spectacular study in which they were able to more than double the lifespan of progeroid mice using just a simple CRISPR gene editing technique. And this is an optimistic extrapolation, but if we were able to achieve the same benefit in humans by doing combination gene therapy, this study, in which they more than doubled lifespan in progeroid mice, could theoretically enable people to live over 160 years of age. And a more relevant study, literally published the same day, by the way, a more relevant study was normal aged mice. They were able to use CRISPR to just suppress one toxic gene, the CAT7 gene that's involved in cellular senescence. And by targeting that CAT7 gene, that's just one out of many that could be, they were able to extend the lifespan in normal aged mice by 25%. They were able to improve their appearance, improve their grip strength. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see that mice and humans have pretty much the same genetic code, though in slightly different forms. So if a gene therapy is working in mice, there's at least a good probability it might have some benefits in people. And we don't have that kind of benefit translating with everything else sometimes. A rat can live a long time and people just don't get the benefit. Gene therapy, it may translate properly. So again, an extrapolation, if we are able to do just minimal CRISPR type work, we may be able to take our lifespan, and get the average up to 98 as opposed to 78. So the great news is the media doesn't ridicule us like they used to. They're reporting on positive findings in which aging is going in reverse. CRISPR is a major way that's being done. And this slide is really interesting that CRISPR was able to reduce cholesterol and triglycerides. And the significance of this is I personally take about 100 different drugs, nutrients, hormones. I take gobs of them every day. But if my genes could be edited back to the age when I was, let's say, 16, 17 years of age, I could potentially do without all of the supplements, drugs, and hormones, and all the other experimental interventions I'm engaged in. That's how promising CRISPR may be. And the New York Times did a nice write-up about a book called The Code Breaker. It reported on some people who won a Nobel Prize for their work on CRISPR-Cas9, and they're talking about engineering people so that we are disease resistant. And this kind of technology is getting headline media news around the world, and it's letting people know that we've got a very different future than what our ancestors did. And the group, this is not the first time. A bunch of people got together to decide we needed to do something about aging. This was a conference that I sponsored back in 2009, and you see a circle around my face, and right underneath me is Aubrey de Grey, and there's a number of other famous people in this room. We had one mission, and that is identify one validated way to reverse biological aging. And the outcome of that was zero. After 3 days of intensive discussions talking about a lot of potential ways, we could not identify one single validated method to reverse aging. Move forward just 12 years, and we've got a whole lot of them. We've got dozens of potential ways to intervene into aging, and to us, It's only a matter of putting the puzzle together, putting all these interventions together, studying them in older people and see what works, what doesn't, what can be interchanged, dosing changes. That's all we need to do to accomplish what is going on. Now, I'm going to play a short little video. This is Dr. Barzelli, who pioneered the metformin research study that got FDA approval. He's going to tell you something that may be the most significant news of this conference.
There's going to, in May, it's going to be announced, there's a huge nonprofit organization that is coming out of the Middle East and is going to spend $1 billion a year to stop aging, pretty much, okay? And I think that's what we need. This is like a Gates Foundation, right, effort.
Can you imagine $1 billion a year being spent to defeat aging? I can't wait till that media report comes out, if it's true, and Dr. Barzelli has never let me down. So next month, in May, you may read a headline news story that $1 billion per year is being allocated. A lot of that money is coming out of the Middle East, from what I understand, and they're as concerned about aging as we are. They don't want to die. So, clustered, regularly interspaced, short, palindromic repeats. CRISPR, this is, in our opinion, the most effective way for us to defeat biological aging in our lifetime. In our lifetime, it's gotten a lot of publicity, and to elaborate more in the Wall Street Journal study in which they used CRISPR to more than double the lifespan of the progeria mice, you look at, it was published, by the way, in Nature, and in Nature, when they publish something, it usually garners media attention. But people suffer from progeria. It's a rare genetic disorder, and what happens is your genes cause your cells to produce a toxic protein called progerin. Therefore, the name progeria. And progeria children, well, they live 12 to 20 years, and they suffer accelerated aging. It's a horrible, horrible disease. But you look at these two pictures and the descriptions underneath. You have the unedited progeria mice, they're rapid age mice. They only live about 7 months, and they show signs of aging very early in their life. The edited mice on the right-hand side, at 11 months, they're scampering around the cage like young mice. They're looking like young mice, behaving like young mice, and they lived about 17 months as opposed to the 7.1 months of the unedited mice. And that was done by doing something that's not that complicated. It may seem that way, but there are 2 DNA base pairs that are involved with progeria. Those are T and A. That's the red ones marked at the bottom. What you want to do is replace those with a C and G DNA base pair so you don't produce that toxic progerin, that substance. So what they did, relatively simple, is they took a DNA base editor, inserted it into an inactive virus, and then infected the mice with progeria with this inactive virus, but a DNA base editor, and they were able to change the toxic T and A progeroid genes to the more safe and dependable G and C genes. And in doing so, they were able to create median lifespan of 510 days in the edited mice compared to only 215 in the unedited mice. And their health span was improved. And they feel this may be available to humans at some point in time. So to optimistically extrapolate on this mouse study, we know that people typically today live about 78 years. I'd like to think people in this audience will live a lot longer, but that's about it, 78 years. If we are able to incorporate combination gene editing therapy into our bodies, we may be living to over 160 years using CRISPR technology. And it's just another chart that we drew up just to show what would happen if humans can benefit the same way the mice did with this CRISPR gene editing therapy. So the great news is George Church did a study, got published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, in which 1 dose of a combination gene therapy improved heart, vascular, kidney function, and maybe most exciting to people who are wanting to eat a lot more than what they know they should, complete reversal of obesity and type 2 diabetes, with the mice being able to eat as much as they wanted. That's going to be our future. if we like to eat a lot of food, in the future with CRISPR editing, our cells will be able to accommodate that food without making us fat, without making us diabetic. So we've got a real opportunity here in the mouse model, translate into people, and we're going to live longer and not have all the vascular problems and enjoy a lot of healthy eating. So George Church has gotten a lot of publicity in the media talking about his plan to reverse aging in people by the year 2030. That is his timetable. And as far as I know, George Church, like me, is an immortalist. He never wants to die. So his research has a lot more going behind it, along with his affiliates, than what a lot of other scientists are. And we interact with George Church's lab all the time, by the way. Dr. Church, starting in 2015, predicted that his CRISPR gene editing technology by 2030 would enable aging to be vanquished, all viral infections to be prevented. Wow. We've got to make it to 2030. We've got to do that, people. I'm going to let you know different ways to do that throughout my presentation. But some people feel that gene editing is something they don't want to do. And by the way, all of us in this room have unedited genes for the most part. Aging, normal aging, unfortunately causes our gene expression pathways to go haywire. So on the left, you see a manuscript of how we used to draft articles for our Life Extension magazine before we had the word processors, and they were a mess. They were just an absolute mess with typos, paragraphs out of place. They didn't look nice. On the right is a precisely edited copy. This came out of a Life Extension magazine where I was talking about rapamycin and autophagy induction. And the question really is, where do you want to be on this? On the left-hand side, you can remain unedited and go through normal degenerative aging processes, or have your genes edited in a way that you forestall or reverse those pathological aging processes. So I just try to make things simple wherever I can so people can understand it. Wall Street Journal did a very nice write-up about the technology of CRISPR, how it's going to eliminate genetic diseases and slow aging, reverse aging, do all these wonderful things, but it mainly dealt with the moral concerns. Should we produce super smart children? And I thought, isn't that kind of a dumb question to ask? Is there anyone here who wants to have a child with learning disabilities, a child with manic depression, a child with any kind of mental health issue? Do we want that? Or wouldn't it be nice to prevent that from the beginning so we have smarter children who can then accomplish greater objectives, maybe keep us all alive forever? So anyway, great data in this Wall Street Journal article, but again, the criticisms about, is it moral? That's the way it's been with everything, including cardiopulmonary resuscitation, blood transfusions. There's always been that issue with new medical technology. Now, our Life Extension group, we partners with the Methuselah Foundation, and we sequenced the genetic code of the bowhead whale. The reason we did that is these whales very rarely get cancer, and they live in the wild up to 268 years of age. So we wanted to see what it was in their gene sequence that enables them to live so long. And we've donated that to George Church's laboratory, and anyone else who wants it, by the way. It's open sourced so that they can study that code and attempt to edit our genes to resemble those of the bowhead whale. And even more exciting, the bowhead whale may have genes that we lack that enable it to have this incredible healthy longevity living in the wild where there is no access to medicine. So that's just one of the projects that we are partnering with Harvard and George Church's laboratory. We're on the phone with them at least once a week, figuring out ways to accelerate their research and bring it into the human arena. So 3 weeks ago, and by the way, when I put these PowerPoints together, it's hard because the new information keeps coming out, so I have to go back and re-edit and put things in their proper place. But this is a shortcut, potentially, to induce some of the favorable gene expression changes requiring CRISPR, instead using CRISPR to edit methylation patterns in a way that we use methylation to control our rate of aging. And it's pretty much an on-off switch they're talking about, a control where we control the methylation patterns so we can activate favorable genes in our body that keep us young and deactivate the gene expression changes that cause us to grow older, cause us to develop malignancies, all the problems associated with aging. So this is brand new technology. They're calling it CRISPR-2. It may result in a shortcut so that we can start garnering these benefits long before they become available on the clinical setting side. So the Financial Times, like the Wall Street Journal in the United States, this is read by the English-speaking world, the investment community worldwide. They talked about COVID being a disease of aging, And then they also talked about anti-aging therapies being developed right now could be, in the 21st century, what antibiotics were in the 20th. And if that prediction is true, we've got a lot of healthy life ahead of us. The question is, we're just entering right now this 21st century, and if they delay it till 2050 or 2060, a lot of us in this room won't be available. But they also reported on the fact that COVID has frightened people into doing something about old age. They now realize how vulnerable they are because of the aging process. So, going back to 2015, the prospect of human age reversal turned real. The media defined it as the year we decided to live forever, and all of a sudden the media started giving us good coverage. Instead of the criticisms and everything else that we had to endure, the covers of magazines were talking about living forever. They were talking about immortality, talking about people who are undergoing umbilical cord plasma infusions and seeking to regain some of their youth by doing so. The media coverage was favorable. We didn't expect it, but it turned in a favorable way. I got some decent coverage in Popular Science. They talked about what I'm doing right now to slow and reverse my aging process and the research that we're funding to make it happen. And front cover, New Scientist talking about a cure for aging. Well, that talk just never occurred in the past. It was considered absurd to even try to slow aging, let alone cure it. Time magazine talking about aging no longer being a dreadful inevitability. But what happened is, as the media kept reporting on all of this information, we got a nice write-up, an MIT technology review. They proclaimed old age is over, which of course it is not, but they described what people like myself are doing to terminate the idea of growing biologically old and dying. They talked about our Revolution Against Aging and Death conference and the perpetual clinical trial, which I am still working to initiate. It's fully funded, by the way. We've raised all the money we need. It's now going through the bureaucracy of getting the clinical trial launched. And the people in that trial, as far as I'm concerned, are destined to live as long as technology is available to keep them alive. And if we succeed with the interventions we're going to use, we keep adding new interventions. No one gets to die in that perpetual clinical trial. That's my objective. What is standing in our way and has stand in our way is the federal government. 2001, they banned federal funding for stem cell research, and federal funding is involved in so many different research arenas that it pretty much shut it all down. Now, the cover of our Life Extension magazine urged our supporters to write Congress, do something to reverse the ban on stem cell research. We failed on this one. This was not one of our legal successes. And it's a warning, though, to realize we can't let the government take away a promising area of research. We just can't do it because we've got all this science, all this laboratory data where the animals are benefiting, and we've got a brick wall barrier called the FDA. They are impeding our ability to do rapid fire clinical trials to take what you're seeing in the animal model and translate that into older people. We're talking about people in their 90s who are desperate. They're willing to self-experiment, sign all kind of waivers, and we want to do these experiments. We got the FDA interfering from the standpoint of causing us to delay the implementation of all that. I was indicted by the FDA in 1991 on about 28 criminal counts. They were seeking over 80 years in prison. And the side benefit of that is, while the media pretty much ignored us back in those days, all of a sudden the government wants to put you in jail. Well, you become newsworthy. So we got into the front page of the local newspapers, all kind of coverage about how evil we were by recommending offshore drugs and unapproved therapies, but it also gave us an opportunity to talk to the reporter and get our message out to the public. And this had an indirect way of bolstering our subscriber base from 4,200 when the FDA rated us to over 25,000. We wouldn't have gotten all that growth if it wasn't for the FDA doing us a favor. So what I'm going to do is play just a little clip from a national PBS broadcast program I appeared on to describe the predicament we were in back in the early 1990s.
Where are you now with the FDA?
Well, we're fighting them tooth and nail.
Are you in court, or did they ever arrest you?
Yes, they did arrest us. They took us away in 1991. We spent about 4 hours in a jail cell before bonding out. We're still under federal indictment. The FDA wants to incarcerate us for 84 years for bringing out this type of information. They don't want the public to hear about it. They want to be the sole disseminators of this type of information. They don't want organizations like the Life Extension Foundation jumping on 10 years ahead of them and telling people to start doing things before they have sanctioned it.
So that's pretty much why I was indicted. I was recommending all kinds of off-label drugs, which I'm going to be doing throughout my conversation. I've continued to do that. I will not stop. I'm not going to let people die just because of a bureaucracy being in place. But here's the big tragedy. Thank you. This is the true tragedy of the FDA's inappropriate actions committed against us and hundreds of others. We're not alone. We were supporting research in the mid-1980s, 18 different projects aimed at identifying at least one major way to delay or reverse aging by the year 2000. We're traveling all the way back to the mid-1980s right now. 18 projects. This was our life extension report describing those research projects. And in one day, the FDA comes in with a SWAT team, raided our facilities, seized our vitamins, seized 4,200 copies of our newsletter ready to be mailed out, and seized some financial instruments. They caused us in one day to have to terminate every one of those 18 independent research projects. Had just one of them advanced, it could have led then to other scientists moving into that technology and maybe enabling people to live a lot longer. Now, we went to court. We litigated against the FDA. We went to Congress. We won there. But in court, we had a judge order the FDA to return the 4,200 newsletters, our supplements, which were all spoiled, had to be thrown out, and our financial instruments. So we won that court battle, and the FDA had to pay our attorney's fees. But it was really not a victory because those 18 independent research studies had to be terminated. And by one example, just one example of what we were funding was an attempt to reverse the effects of thymic involution. As we know, as our thymus gland shrivels, we lose the ability to produce functional naive T cells, and many of us die of immune senescence. So this is just some of the information that we were supporting. This is published in our newsletter that they seized, and we had to stop that research. Think of how many people may have died because we couldn't push that forward. And what we were looking at, by the way, is a drug approved in Europe, but you can't get it in the United States, called thymosin alpha-1. We were hoping to mimic the benefits of the thymus gland at that point in time. So we know Greg Fahey's been on the stage talking about his thymic age reversal project. He reversed aging 2.5 years and did it with HGH, DHEA, metformin. That's fantastic. And it's 2019. We were looking at that in 1985, 1986, and then the research had to stop because of what the FDA did. And we continued publishing in our magazine what the FDA kept threatening to revoke our bond and put us in jail again, and that is we published a list of medications that you could obtain in other countries, like metformin or ribavirin to treat hepatitis C, a whole host of them that are now available. We published that in our magazine. And if you put it in perspective, what we were doing in 1995, there was no internet to speak of. So if you heard of a drug somewhere and you wanted to find out where to get it, well, there was no other place to read about it except Life Extension Magazine. Even though the FDA told us we're not allowed to do it, we kept publishing lists of offshore medications, and the FDA just continued to threat, superseding indictments they were threatening me with. Well, metformin turns out to be something that's going to be studied, as we know. Now, bear in mind, we recommended metformin in 1995. Move forward 20 years. This is just an example of the slow pace of medical research, and there's going to be a clinical trial on metformin by itself, and it's gotten a lot of publicity. And there's actually a second trial, by the way, on metformin, recently approved. They're going to be doing this one in San Antonio to see if it can help with the frailty associated with aging in people over age 65. And frailty is a major, major issue. We've lost some supporters, people like you who take a fall because they're frail and fracture and then die in a couple months from sepsis. So this is serious. They're doing research with metformin along with Dr. Barzilli. So there'll be 2 independent studies on metformin by itself to see how well it may slow aging. So our battle with the FDA, it truly was scientific innovation versus FDA tyranny, FDA censorship. They did not want us disseminating this information to the public, and we simply refused to stop publishing. Now, in my condominium are old newspapers that I have framed they're full-page ads that we ran in local newspapers exposing how the FDA was murdering Americans. Now, I know you can't read those very well, so I transcribed them really quick. This is what people would read when they picked up their newspaper. The FDA is murdering Americans. No one is speaking up. We listed examples of drugs that were used in Europe but not approved in the United States, meaning Americans were dying from a disease that had an effective therapy. So we talked about the court rulings that the FDA was losing around the country, and a lot of those losses were because we supported the people the FDA was attacking. We supported anyone who was selling a legitimate therapy the FDA was trying to suppress. So we exposed the corruption, the incompetence in the FDA. The FDA didn't like it. We also exposed the high price of prescription drugs. They were bad in the early 1990s, but right now they're exorbitant, beyond description. We exposed all that, warning we need to do something to open up the ability for people to import their own medications from other countries. So this is an example of the news broadcast of our FDA Holocaust Museum, which we opened up in the year of 1993. I'll just play this very little brief clip and then get into the museum.
There's a drug war going on you might not be aware of. A battle between the Food and Drug Administration and some people who think that agency is holding back on life-saving medication. As Health Watch reporter Dr. Steve Greenberg explains, the battleground is a new museum located in a Broward storefront.
What they're referring to is our FDA Holocaust Museum. We received international media coverage and plenty of national opportunities to go on TV because we dared to challenge the legitimacy of the FDA. And let me see here. This was the grand opening. We had the place packed with people who wanted to see what we were going to unveil, including some FDA agents. They came in too to see how we were going to attack them. So I'm going to play a vintage video. It's short, but it'll describe what we had in the FDA museum to document the atrocities committed against the healthy American public by an incompetent and corrupt agency of the federal government.
How many Americans die every single year because of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration? My name is Bill Falloon. I'm Vice President of the Life Extension Foundation, and we have documented more than 70 years of atrocities committed against the health of the American public by the incompetent and corrupt Food and Drug Administration. We're entering the FDA Holocaust Museum. We call it a Holocaust Museum because we have substantiated that the FDA has caused the suffering and death of millions of American citizens every single year.
By the way, every one of our attorneys said we were out of our mind for doing these things. I mean, we were facing life in prison. We were upsetting the FDA even more, and we said, well, let's keep going, let's keep going. Okay, there's a little bit more to that tape, but it's not a big deal. It just exposes what the FDA is doing to kill Americans, which is a lot. And again, continuous media coverage. They were doing us a favor by indicting us and telling the media about the fact of how bad we were. Enlightened individuals like yourself were sending us donations, joining as members, starting to buy our products. We never would have gotten that publicity if the FDA had not done us the favor of raiding us, arresting us, and trying to put us in jail for life. So we got a lot of media coverage, which really helped a lot. And one of the reasons the FDA thought they had a right to take everything we had is, in 1985, we published a newsletter in which we talked about common dietary supplements that were available everywhere, nothing proprietary that we sold, and we hypothesized that these could slow the progression of HIV into full-blown AIDS. And the FDA did not like that. They felt, until it ran through a clinical trial of some sort, that people should not do this. And we said, but there's already some good evidence right now, anecdotal evidence, that people take supplements, they're doing a little bit better as far as their progression of AIDS. We also promoted a drug available in other countries called isoprenosine. This is a box of it. I'm going to talk a lot about that at the end of this presentation, but you really can't get this right now. COVID has wiped out the supplies of it, and it's not available in the United States. It's one of those drugs the FDA refuses to approve despite its benefits. But we were vindicated. This is October 1985. 1990, New England Journal of Medicine showed that people given isoprenosine had a dramatic reduction in progressing to full-blown AIDS. And this helped vindicate us, by the way, in the media. When the media would attack us because the FDA would say we're just committing fraud, we're quacks, we said, well, here's what we published in 1985, and here's what the New England Journal of Medicine says in 1990. How many HIV people perished prematurely because they weren't allowed to learn about isoprenosine, a drug that you could import from other countries? And here we move forward to 2019, a big meta-analysis done, And isopronosine, it's still not approved. You still have to get it from other countries. It may be effective against all of those viruses in those blue boxes. And think about cytomegalovirus. Most of us are infected with this. It shortens our lifespan 3 to 4 years. Epstein-Barr may be a factor in development of certain lymphomas. All of these viruses, by the way, we want to get rid of in our body, and it's not very easy to do. Isopronosine may help to do that, and it may also help reverse immune senescence. This is research we're going to do independently to validate if that's true. But the bottom line is, isopronosine is something that I suggest, and this is an empty box. I've taken it all myself, by the way. Consider taking, when you get your hands on it, which may be a couple months from now, 1,000 milligrams 3 times a day. Do it 5 days out of the week, and do it for maybe 2-3 months every year. I don't think it's something you need to take all the time, but you want to bolster your NK activity to remove pre-malignant cells, viral infected cells, malignant cells that might be occult. The idea of enhancing your immune system to this degree, again, just a couple months out of the year, and I think isopronosine will become available once this COVID problem is resolved and they ramp up their manufacturing. But this is what a take-home lesson as to what you might do, and I can't even tell you where to order it from, because everywhere that we used to get it from, they're saying we're out of stock. But you may find it at some point. We know that if you're over age 60, your risk of dying of COVID is much higher. Again, this is immune senescence. This article talked about people over age 60 account for about 90% of the COVID deaths. This is why drugs like isopronosine are so important to maintain healthy immunity as we age. So this is kind of a reenactment of the FDA raid in 1987. These are not the actual people. It's just a stock photo, but it resembles what happened. The FDA got a SWAT team together, if you can believe that or not, a SWAT team to kick in our doors, put a gun to my head, and seize everything we had, everything that they could fit into big tractor-trailer trucks. The purpose was just to put us out of business, but we didn't stay out of business, which is why we got indicted. So I'm going to give you a brief video of me talking about staring down the barrel of a .45 caliber handgun.
I've had to stare down the barrel of a .45 caliber handgun. I've had FDA agents armed to break down my doors, seize my vitamins. They don't like what I have to say. But what I said back in 1985 in our newsletter about using vitamins to slow the progression of AIDS now is acknowledged by the FDA as being true.
No, wait a minute now. You said that vitamins
slow the progression of AIDS in 1985. Now, 1985 in our newsletter, Anti-Aging News, that taking vitamins will slow the progression of AIDS. The FDA used that newsletter to get a search warrant and seize all of our vitamins because they didn't want AIDS patients taking them. In the April 1995 issue of FDA Consumer, the FDA now is recommending that HIV-positive people take vitamin supplements to slow the progression of the disease.
It's a real tragedy. Again, 1985. Our newsletter suggested people buy just common over-the-counter nutrients, nothing that we were selling that was proprietary, and FDA went berserk over this. That's 1985. Move forward to 1995, 10 years later, FDA Consumer Magazine has an article that recommends that as soon as you're diagnosed as having HIV, start aggressive nutritional intervention, including vitamin and mineral supplements. And by the way, we were still under indictment during this period of time. We were still facing 80 years in jail, even though one part of the FDA was telling people, if you have HIV, take some dietary supplements, and the FDA accusing us in court of defrauding the American public. So we've got this kind of data, and then move forward another 20 years at this point. This is really scary that in 1985, we're recommending HIV people take vitamins. This meta-analysis showed that the progression of HIV towards full-blown AIDS could be reduced by simple supplements like selenium and zinc. You see, just zinc, adding that to a micronutrient supplement, reduced mortality 71%. Selenium slowed the progression by 64%. In other words, we've been vindicated, but it doesn't feel good because there's tens of millions of people who needlessly suffered and died, and they could have bought for $12 to $40 a year. I'm talking about cheap stuff, cheap vitamins that could have delayed the progression, given them some more life, given them enough life to advance to a point where AIDS is now controllable using prescription medications. So, let's see here, Phil Donahue. Okay, now Phil was not very kind to us, by the way. And look, everyone's entitled to their opinion. Phil Donahue loves the FDA. He feels that they are protecting him from all kind of terrible things. So I'm going to play this little clip where he is questioning our credibility here.
The drugs on your sale list at the time of this raid and arrest and indictment, which is incidentally remains. This indictment is alive today.
Yeah, for 10 years, the FDA has been trying to put us in jail.
Well, this audience may wonder what's taking the feds so long.
Well, they have a hard time because, see, they go out and interview people who take these therapies, and the people start yelling at the FDA agents for interfering with their ability to get these drugs.
Yeah.
They work on people. When they can't get them, they start feeling the effects of not using these therapies. That's what's holding them back.
Yeah, this was a 9-year war, by the way. We were fighting the FDA from the time they raided our facilities, put us in jail. They tried to deny us bond. They did everything they could to destroy life extension because we were disseminating information they didn't want the public to hear. Well, something interesting happened in 1996. All of the different lawsuits we were filing, the public mobilization we did to enlighten the world about what the FDA was really doing, it caused the Department of Justice to do something unprecedented. And we all read in the newspapers about people very wealthy getting into legal problems. Department of Justice files a motion to dismiss the indictment brought against us by the FDA. That has never happened in legal history unless the government loses all their witnesses or something. In other words, they don't dismiss their own indictments. They spent 9 years trying to shut down life extension, incarcerate me forever, and there was a complete and absolute surrender. We did not capitulate one iota. They told us to stop promoting unapproved drugs in your magazine, and we kindly said to them, no. We were polite. We said no. But this 9-year victory over the FDA motivated many others, many other people to realize you can beat the bureaucrats if you fight the right way. And again, the biggest concern the FDA had was us listing offshore drugs in the magazine. And again, this is before there was an internet. If you didn't get this information in a magazine, you'd have a hard time finding a pharmacy to ship you medications. And we never stopped advertising these drugs in our magazine until the internet became prevalent enough where we didn't need to. You just go onto Google and find your own source of different medications, often at rock bottom prices. So the victories spanned 3 different major areas. We forced and initiated the passage of the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, passed in October 1994. That legitimized certain health claims for dietary supplements. And we did that by mobilizing the entire country. That allowed us to convey to our readers what kind of structure function benefits may occur in response to certain dietary supplements. But we also forced the FDA to accelerate the approval of life-saving drugs like ribavirin, which can double the cure rate of hepatitis C. And even with Sovaldi, the breakthrough hepatitis C drug, it still relies on ribavirin for optimal benefits. The FDA was stonewalling the approval of ribavirin because they didn't like the company's CEO. Well, we pushed that forward along with some other people to get them to approve that, and we reduced at least the FDA's ability to stop me from talking about off-label drug information. Off-label drugs often work better than their on-label benefits, such as metformin. And this is a website that I've been working on. I'm going to launch it at some point, but it's going to take the entire FDA Holocaust Museum and put it onto a website so people can understand why they need to amend the Food and Drug Act, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. It needs to be amended because we're aging to death. And I hate to bring up topics that sometimes people don't quite understand, but unfortunately governments have a propensity of murdering their own citizens. And there's some very evil people in recent decades that have killed their own citizens. Now Mao, he had an ostensibly charitable or benevolent objective. He wanted to grow more food. So he came up with this idea, let's seize the farmer's land and turn it all into collective farming. And the tragic outcome of this ostensibly benevolent objective was 30 to 45 million Chinese starving to death. Some reports talk about 55 million Chinese starving to death because his way of farming produced insufficient food, therefore tens of millions of people starving to death. And the leader, as far as the percentage of the people killed, Pol Pot, Cambodia, he may have killed 25% of his entire population by putting them to work in farms when they weren't able to, mass executions, the collective farming that failed in China. He decided to do it again. And I use this as an example because the FDA is doing this to us, and if Pol Pot was in the United States and did this, it would be equivalent to about 80 million people dying. But the problem is, unfortunately, the FDA has been around longer. Their misdeeds, their delay of approving new drugs, approving toxic drugs that people should avoid, they've been around 115 years. So they have, be it intentionally or unintentionally, it doesn't really matter, they've killed more people than some of those horrible dictators in the past. And this is something I'm going to be bringing out. I've written books about it to expose every problem in the FDA. There are so many of them, I could put on a 2-day presentation on these books alone, but you can read these books if you choose to, or just understand, and I think most of you do, the FDA is not our friend. But the reality is, the FDA, as it relates to delaying clinical trials, they think they're doing their job. And it's Congress that needs to amend the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act so we can then start rapid-fire clinical trials to identify quickly what works, what doesn't, to slow and reverse biological aging. So the biomedical renaissance, human age reversal, started in 2015. Before then, if you asked me about that, I'd say I hope it happens someday, but I have no idea how to do it, because I really had no idea in 2014 how to do it. But the evidence started to manifest. And what we as humans have to do is target more than one mechanism. We have to figure out a way to incorporate into a treatment program everything that we know can work. This is an example of what we know has demonstrated rejuvenating properties in the animal model and in people to some extent. We need to put these pieces together, combine these interventions, and I'm going to explain all that, by the way, tomorrow when I talk about anti-aging drugs. Put these together in a systematic way so that we can control our aging process long enough for CRISPR to be developed that is going to result in potential biological immortality. And quoting people who were in predicaments, we're in a predicament now because we're aging and there's not a cure yet, but Churchill, June 1940, the Nazis had taken over most of Europe, the Japanese were taking over British colonies in the Far East, and it was only the UK standing by itself, no one else, but he incited people to become optimistic. He talked about victory at all costs, victory in spite of terror, victory however long the road may be. And as it pertains to us in this room, without victory against biological aging, there is no survival. None. We must achieve the victory. Our Life Extension group has a track record. It goes page after page after page, but these are some of the more popular interventions that we've talked about over the 44 years we've been publishing that have been proven to work. I mean, a person with heart failure who takes CoQ10, they live a little longer. It's not a cure, but it does delay the progression. Cimetidine, great adjuvant anti-cancer therapy, by the way. In some cases, it doubles survival rates. So this is what we've done over the last, 44 years, and I could play these pages over and over. I just don't want to overwhelm people about that. And a hero of mine, the father of microbiology, he didn't just do research. He made sure he put his discoveries down on paper so that others could take the data that he was gathering about microscopic organisms and move that technology forward. And you look at that year 1716, that's when bacterial infections were like the leading causes of death. And he was looking at these bacteria under the microscope, not even realizing what they were, but it led to where we are right now. We have great antibiotics that can kill most bacterial infections. So I feel I'm doing the same with our Life Extension magazine and Anti-Aging News back in 1980. I have an addiction to reading medical journals. It's just a hobby of mine. And when I find something in a medical journal that might pertain to someone's health, or even their potential to stay alive, I want to publish that. I want to put that in our Life Extension magazine, which I do every single month. And we've been publishing consecutively for 41 years. Now, the Financial Times, I mentioned they wrote that article that was very favorable about finding ways to better treat aging. This is a reality, and I'm hoping people in this room will appreciate what I'm going to say. If we are in the lower economic class, socioeconomic class, we can't afford to eat healthy. We can't afford good medical care. And the data shows that these people in the lower classes, that they are aging much faster and that they have about 19 fewer years of good health than people who are doing what you are all doing, taking care of yourself, avoiding the bad stuff. And this is a little bit more of an elaborate description of it, but people in England living in the most deprived areas, men, they live 18.9 years less in good health, women 19.4 years less, and of course, life expectancy it's much greater in people who can afford to eat healthy and avoid some of the bad habits. And this is just a real quick chronology, or at least bullet points, of the differences between the upper class people in Britain and the lower socioeconomic class. But I'm showing this to you now because we all need to be reminded about what we do to ourselves, either intentionally or just accidentally, to accelerate aging, cause disease, in other words, circumvent what we're trying to do to stay healthy. So you look at what people who can afford fresh fruits and vegetables as opposed to deep-fried, sugary foods, yeah, they're going to live a lot longer in a healthy state. And if you can avoid obesity, if you can avoid the problems associated with, unfortunately, lower socioeconomic classes, you're going to live longer and you're going to live healthier. And I just want to remind people about this because sometimes we just neglect to take care of ourselves. So I want to thank everyone for your multi-decade support of Life Extension. Some of you in here have been members of our group that long. And I want to conclude with, well, reminding people, I sell dietary supplements. If you take dietary supplements and you purchase them from us, you indirectly help support age reversal research. I have a full-time staff of people working on the clinical trials protocols and pushing them through the bureaucratic labyrinth of delays, but nonetheless, this is how I fund research via the sales of dietary supplements. And I've got one more video to play. And this is me, I guess, around 1996. This is isoprenosine, by the way. I don't sell this, and you may not be able to find it real quick, but nonetheless, this is what I said about it back in 1996.
The next medication we're going to talk about deals with the immune system. As people get older, their immune systems decline. They become much more vulnerable to cancer and infectious diseases. There's a drug that was discovered in the United States called isoprenosine. This drug has been documented in over 1,000 studies to be effective in enhancing immune function. The FDA does not allow this drug to be sold in the United States, but it's sold in every other country in the world. The New England Journal of Medicine has published articles showing that the use of this drug will slow the progression of HIV infection. There are several studies in Europe showing that cancer patients can go into a remission if they take this drug. It enhances the immune system's attack against cancer cells.
So you can see why the FDA wanted to put me in a cage and deny me bond. They didn't want Americans to learn that they could buy drugs that could literally save their lives with infectious diseases. Now, this entire presentation, all four of them, by the way, will be at age-reversal.net. I'm going to conclude right now with a little bit of a recap. It's only about a minute and a half, and a few new slides that I put in here, and then we'll move on to the next presentation. Well, that's my first presentation. Okay, thank you.